Good afternoon, everyone. In fact, a warm good afternoon, since it's summer. So I'm Rakesh Parmeshwara. I'm sure people who have a fine eye for detail would have realized I'm definitely not the dashing Sushanta today. So unfortunately, Sushanta ran into some logistical challenges and couldn't be here today. So I'm Rakesh. I'm part of the ISG UK business. I'll actually lead infrastructure strategy for EMEA. So hopefully, I'll do half the justice that Sushanta would have done if he turned up here. And in fact, I actually came up with a quick joke. So I'm glad I'm standing in because Sushanta had practiced to crawl, walk, and run as part of the entry because that's the topic that we're going to discuss today. So before we get serious, let's reflect on cloud. So Alex beautifully talked about how cloud has evolved exponentially over the last decade or last 2 decades. It's very clear that the public cloud market is growing leaps and bounds even now. In fact, it's been projected to grow 20% this year alone from, I think, 410 billion last year to 494 billion in value this year. And it's actually expected to grow to 600 billion in the coming year. So again, lots of growth happening. And as they say, with great powers comes great responsibility. And with cloud, with great cloud adoption comes the need to ensure great accountability as well. And that's exactly the topic we're here to talk about. So that's FinOps, or financial operations as we like to call it. In fact, before I introduce my esteemed colleagues, there was a survey that was done for IT and business budget holders for cloud. And they all unanimously agreed the need to ensure accountability through the use of FinOps to ensure success during cloud implementation. And that's quite a testament. And you know what the surprise fun fact? Only 10% of them admitted they have a mature FinOps in place. If they are a union, I'm pretty sure you would agree that they would all be on strike right now asking to implement FinOps. And that's quite timely. And without much ado, can I introduce my esteemed colleagues on stage? Firstly, Sanjeev Kumar from Accolite Digital. So he's a technology and cloud leader and is part of the leadership team at Accolite Digital. Warm applause. Thank you. Can I now introduce Rajiv Chatrat from a German practice. So he's a principal consultant. He's a digital engineering specialist, but also brings a great amount of insights in the manufacturing sector. So the way we're going to run this panel, it's going to be quite interactive. So as you can tell, I have a list of pre-prepared questions to kick off, but then we're going to absolutely come to you. So you can ask Rajiv and Sanjeev quite rhyming names as well. So we've made an effort there so they can answer some of your questions around FinOps. Let's actually do a quick round of introduction. Sanjeev, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself to the audience as well?
Sure. Thank you, Rakesh. Hi, everyone. My name is Sanjeev Kumar. I am part of the European leadership team at Accolite Digital. I have now about 26 years in the industry, mostly in the telecom, media, retail, and utilities. Having worked both on the consulting side as well as on the service provider side, I was at Vodafone for a few years leading a big transformation program. So a lot of my examples would be what it means from engineering on a services side, as well as also being on the other side, how does it feel when you spend a lot of money, but then you continue to spend a lot of money on the cloud going forward. Very nice to be here. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Sanjeev, Rajiv?
Hi, I'm Rajiv Chatrat. I'm based in Hamburg, Germany. So I come with more than 25 years of experience in engineering and manufacturing, organization, digitalization. I've been part of the digital transformation agendas of a few FMCG and discrete manufacturing companies already. And as you know, cloud is, well, it used to be a hype, but it's a necessity now. And so, it's great to be here and sharing our insights and some references to what we've seen in the market.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. So let's kick off the panel. So let's start with the most obvious question. What is FinOps and why is it so important? So Sanjeev, do you want to start? Thank you.
So I think the short answer is the way you effectively and efficiently manage your cloud cost. Obviously, we know that. But maybe if I can bring in a perspective of a client or a telco client in the US where we did some cloud migration work. And when we went back to look at the business value realization, back to Alex's point on, you have to make sure the value is realized. We saw that the actual cost or the maintenance cost on the cloud was a lot higher than what was envisaged. And we saw a number of things. One is all the good engineers want to over-provision. We saw a number of dev test environments, like more than 20 which are not being sort of used all the time, so you don't really need them 24/7. And more importantly, there were options or opportunities to optimize the cost across the enterprise. And that's probably the FinOps part, which is the most important, that it's not on one particular silo. If I'm doing my own business app, I'm putting it on the cloud, I'm just looking at my own thing. But the moment you look at from a FinOps angle across the enterprise, you see opportunities, you can optimize it across the full value chain. I think that's probably one example which kind of brought to life for me why FinOps should be taken as almost as a practice across the organization to manage costs.
It is interesting indeed. Rajiv, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I'll try to bring in the business owner angle here. Now, if I'm a business owner, my priorities are different. My priorities in a manufacturing organization is probably to increase productivity, to increase the overall equipment efficiency, basically to get the products out in a cheap and high efficiency manner. Cloud for me is just an infrastructure tool. Although when I do my business case creation, I do factor in costs, but I don't really go to my CIO or my IT organization to get those validated because I don't need them anymore. I can run it on my own. But having said that, is my business case still staying where it was earlier? Is the break-even point still there, or it's moved right without any real mistake of mine? Is something that I still don't know. So I think FinOps is a good reference point in that particular direction. And if those kind of structures, organization target operating models, FinOps experts can be embedded into the organization. I think it's a great thing. It will help me.
Indeed, no, that's a great insight, and it's definitely resonates with the point Alex made around customer centricity. But it's very clear in the area of FinOps, the business seems quite decoupled from the technology organization, and there's a lot that I think, as you rightly said, we need to be doing to bridge that gap, to bring in rigor, to bring in a bit more structure, still keep it lean because the business need to consume, but absolutely drive it, to make sure we realize the true benefits. On that note, I think a question that I'm sure is on everyone's mind: how do you set up a FinOps organization? So, Sanjeev, yeah, please.
Sure. Just one point adding on to what Rajiv said. From my experience, the business cases are never live. The moment you get the money, I think they kind of become stale. So that's one angle where FinOps can certainly help. Coming back to your question on how do you set up, I think our experience is start small. The first step is, you can call it baselining, just understanding what's happening today. You will be surprised, even in the large organizations, the understanding of how much cloud resources we are using per business domain or a horizontal domain, or whichever way you want to cut it. What is the charge back to a particular unit? What resources have an impact on your consumer-facing applications? It's not there. I mean, it will be there in multiple kind of silos. So I think the first step is so that everyone understands where you are as an organization, and also the nomenclature, so the taxonomy of what you mean by chargeback versus showback. There are tons of confusing terms we always use as consultants. But the idea is to make sure the organization has a taxonomy. So if I say this is the chargeback or this is the cost allocation to your particular business unit is fully understood by everyone in the organization. So I think that's the fundamental starting point for me. The second part, which is interesting for me, is that to my earlier point, it needs to be set up as a horizontal organization which can work across the enterprise. But the accountability of managing costs should be with the business operations team. So this is not a team which is going to start to own the costs of each of the cloud infrastructure elements, except maybe some of the cross-domain enterprise elements. So they need to set up the framework, they need to set up the structure, and then start to communicate with the business domain owners how to kind of inculcate those behaviors in the day-to-day processes.
Indeed. I think you hit the nail on the head. The first step is always recognizing there's actually a problem and then trying to work a solution that's simple enough for the business to understand, consume, and actually implement. And I think that's absolutely the right thing. Rajiv, anything for you to add?
Yeah, so I basically resonate the thoughts, Sanjeev. Other than that, what I think is there should be this multi-discipline team, and I'll try to take the technology angle. So there need to be experts in this team who understand cloud economics, who understand what architectures are best suited, and they know, how to switch on, switch off, tag the services when. And so basically a very, very strong monitoring and operational unit should work along with the business owners.
Indeed. It's definitely, there's a need to demystify FinOps.
Yeah.
So things like tagging needs to be in a much simpler form for a business user to understand and therefore buy into. So that leads to my next question. So what should organizations be looking in terms of operating model changes to both implement FinOps, but also make sure it's actually successful?
I think if I look at from a telecom angle, it's very specific maybe to the industry. The next few years are going to be fundamental change in the telecom industry because 5G is all about the network itself is going to be software defined and it will all be on the cloud. So there will be multi-cloud orchestrators running. So the complexity of the cloud infrastructure is going to be huge for the telecom and media industry. So that means FinOps is not going to be a sideshow. It's going to be sort of at the heart of how they manage costs so that they don't spiral out of control. In terms of, I think, setting up, as I said earlier, it needs to be as a thin team which has experts around, Rajiv mentioned cloud economics, also people who understand the individual domains really well. They're able to craft a framework which works for that particular organization and also do a lot of communication. I think the amount of communication across silos in any organization is very, very poor, not only FinOps but in general. So a lot more communication is needed for everyone to understand the taxonomy, what the policies are, what the guidelines are, and almost handhold them to get to the first step, that it is part of your life, it is part of your day-to-day duties. It's not somebody else to police it for them.
Indeed.
And then I think once you put in those kind of processes, have a governance framework where you can measure. Accurate and precise reporting is important and on a periodic basis. Measure and continue to show each of the business unit leaders how you are performing against your targets.
That's great insight indeed. And I'm sure, Rajiv, you would acknowledge, given your expertise in target model and business process optimization, that there's absolutely a need to get the underpinning organization right to make sure it's lean. So is there anything that you want to maybe chime in on that subject?
Yeah, so I mean, two cases come to my mind. One was this FMCG customer of mine who is a rather large company based in north of England. They did everything right. They had the main purpose of the business owner was to increase productivity, to make digital twins so that they can understand the process better, replicate the processes across plant, to increase the overall equipment efficiency, predictive maintenance, etc. Everything was done right. The only mistake that he did make was there was very little or no involvement of the IT infrastructure team. I think, as I earlier also said, it should be a joint effort, a very, very strong organization with good focus, not 10%, but higher focus on FinOps as well. Otherwise, the whole break even can move to the right. And the second one that comes to me, my mind is electric vehicle startup, right? Who obviously, since the startup, they want to get into market early. Cloud is the base on which they want to build their products. Now, there are various functional departments here: engineering, manufacturing, after-sales service. Everybody wants to consume cloud. Engineering for innovation, manufacturing for increase in productivity, data lakes for analytics, etc. After sales to see how new revenue generation models can be run. And everybody, when they went to the CIO, they wanted their own tenant. And since this small startup had a clear cloud-first strategy with FinOps embedded into it, they refused. They said, you consume our one single tenant, we will manage the rest for you. Whether you need more compute power, more storage space, that doesn't really matter. And it was successful because they did stuff within budget, and cloud actually turned out to be a enabler for their success in terms of time and quality and cost.
That's really good insights indeed, and that brings me to my last pre-prepared question. I think it'll be really good to know, Rajiv and Sanjeev, where have you seen FinOps being done well, and what does good look like?
Okay, maybe a couple of examples across organizations, not in one organization. I think organizations where, to my earlier point, have looked at FinOps as a way of doing things rather than as a separate organizations. A bit like 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, every telco will have a chief data officer. But if you take out data from the day-to-day job, it doesn't really work. So a lot of them have actually gone back to data organizations being an enabler for what the business teams should do. So I think it's the same philosophy wherever I've seen it successfully done, that FinOps is building the framework, doing the taxonomy, doing the policies, doing the processes, but the ownership lies with the business domain team. So I think that's one, wherever I've seen it successfully, I think that's one example of that. The second is the communication and the cultural aspects, because a lot of the engineering teams, as I said earlier, want to over-provision, they want everything. And once you have even gone live, there is very rarely a check of, do you really need to consume all the resources which you are doing now? So there is a little bit of a cultural shift and a change which is needed. And I think the organizations which tend to do well focus a lot more on that rather than just on the technical part of it.
Indeed.
Agreed. And I would just add to it, the organizations who want to become digital native or already are digital native, they're doing a good job. Like the startup I mentioned about. Yeah.
Indeed. And I think that brings us to the end of our pre-prepared stuff. So is there any questions from the audience? There you go. A couple of questions.
Yeah, cool. Afternoon, gents. So you've spoken quite a lot about the human side, the cultural side of it, but what's the role that tooling plays, and are there any emerging dominant tool sets that you see people adopting?
So maybe I have seen some tool sets. I would say the tool sets should follow the initial baselining and thinking and what you want to do. Because I've seen one example where when you say, oh, there's a cost suddenly spiraled up, just go and buy a tool and it'll fix it. It will not fix it. So there are quite a few tools actually now which I've seen without naming any of them. But I would say get the baselining and understanding of where you are, what you want to do, and then bring in a tool to automate, because tooling is important. As I said, if I look at just telecom, if the network also becomes software defined and it's on the cloud, the whole of a telecom organization is on the cloud. So that's what you're running. So it's going to be very, very complex to manually be able to understand the economics of it as well as the impact of it.
And if I complement that as well, it's very clear there's no silver bullet, right? If there was one, we wouldn't be talking about this subject right now. There are many solutions out there, many which claim to solve the problem, and I don't think any come close to solving the issue. And I think the challenge actually is going back to the basics. It's defining what business KPIs mean. It's defining what's important. It's defining, actually ironing out what's the problem we're trying to solve. As you rightly said, Sam, there's a mindset shift. There's a fin operations, which is quite a new concept in the industry. It's the entire demystifying it, making it simple, going back to basics, and then finding complementary solutions to try and solve that one by one. I think that's the approach I would go for. I think we had a question, Steve?
So, great job, guys. I think it's a really interesting panel discussion. I think you're spot on with the organizational and the ops side. When I think of FinOps, though, I think it's really about radical transparency. And as the cloud grows, as you start enabling the business, they're going to consume more, right? You want them to consume more. But how do you think about providing that radical transparency to the business? And how do you think about managing the cost side or helping them manage the cost side as you're providing that level of transparency?
Okay, I think that's a difficult one. I think the taxonomy or what you define as the key things for the organization are very important, because so all these hyperscalers will give you a lot of reports. I have seen, I don't understand more than 10% of it, because the moment it becomes big, there's tons of data. But if I am the business unit owner running a particular set of business apps, I don't really know what it means to me. So I think back to your point on the radical transparency, somebody, and that's the FinOps team, they need to be able to define in a business sense, you running your business apps and the correlation of that into the consumption of the cloud resources. What is the link and what is the nomenclature, taxonomy, the tagging, every part of it. I think that's the bit. I have not seen very many examples of it, but that's where I would start, because I think unless you define it clearly what it means to you as a business owner and how it connects to all the cloud component data I get, it's very, very difficult.
I would agree. I think it's all about building the right guardrails around the do's and don'ts, making things a bit more simple for the business to understand why we're doing this, why is FinOps important, and then actually taking them on the journey. And I think that's really the key to unlock the transparency part. But Rajiv, do you have any thoughts?
No.
Simon? Yeah? There you go.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Any other question? I saw an ad there. Can we have the mic?
Just talk loudly if you want.
Oh, yeah.
So if you've outsourced management of your infrastructure or your application, you're looking to outsource it. Nowadays, from what I see, every service provider has a FinOps slide. How much responsibility for FinOps would you outsource, and what do you have to keep in-house?
Good question. Anyone wants to take?
The question, because we're recording.
Okay.
I can repeat. Yeah, if you're in an outsourcing situation, how much responsibility for FinOps would you put with the service provider, and how much would you keep in-house?
Do you guys want to start?
Okay, I'll take a shot at that. I think the creation of what FinOps means to the organization, the definitions, and the correlation between the business domain knowledge and what it comes from the cloud, that you have to stay in the organization, because you can't really outsource that. There is no way any external service provider will be able to do a good job, and also that's not their job anyways. So I think that part has to stay within the organization. What obviously they can do is to make sure if whatever part they are managing on behalf of the organization, they are given certain rules and guidelines that they have to stay within that particular cost or that particular variability of the cost, and certain parameters around what cloud economics works in their context. So at that level, in terms of reporting, in terms of how they manage their cost, I think that should be outsourced. there'll be just a component which fits into the wider FinOps strategy, which has to be within the organization.
Agree.
Just to add to that, also the operative side of it, the whole tagging, administration. So I think those things can be outsourced quite nicely and with a lot of control to a service provider.
Yeah, and I would try and build on that as well, right? So it goes back to the conversation we used to have around SIAM, service integration back in the day. We had SIAM 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Things keep evolving. I think cloud ops is in the 1.0 phase. This is where I think organization need to do the groundwork to get and embed the governance layer, to embed accountability, and that's the key to success. The implementation can absolutely be with the providers, right? Which can bring in complementary solutions to enable the governance to work, to enable the KPIs to be reported. So it's really building the right framework, the right foundation, and then moving forward. And that's why we kind of signposted crawl, walk, run. So first, start crawling, get your organization up, recognize the problem, then walk. And to do the walk, you will need those complementary skill set, from the providers. And I think we have really good, providers in the room here today who can solve that problem for organizations. Hopefully that answers the question. Any other final question? I think we have 3 more minutes left. If not, we can give you 3 minutes break.
More from a curiosity perspective.
I think you'll have to wait for the mic.
Hi. Just more from a curiosity and observation standpoint. For someone who's really starting fresh, ground zero, your inputs in terms of should the organization be just considering a single cloud, just IaaS layer, infrastructure as a service, or should that be flipped around the multi-cloud situation, not just the infrastructure as a service, but platform and software as a service? Just your understanding around one or the other, or would you rather say, what's your budget, right? Look at your pockets. Just.
I'll try to take a different view at that. So I would say, I think it should be business case driven. It should be, finally, what is it that you want to drive out of your cloud investment? Yeah. And now a lot of people think that moving to cloud is cost savings, which is probably the last of the things. I think most of the advantages that you get from the cloud, the services that are available to the cloud, for example, AI and data lakes, et cetera. So those are the things that actually drive your kind of move to a cloud, and that's what I wanted to say.
Agree, and I think as Alex kind of indicated earlier as well, there are many cloud solutions out there. It's about recognizing what is the business objective, what are you trying to solve, and then working out what the right fit solution is. And yes, it needs to be within certain guardrails. It needs to integrate into the API architecture and all of that good stuff, because I know organizations are moving to microservices-based architecture and all the good stuff. So there is some thought to be brought in there, and I think that's where the business needs to work with the technology side to ensure there's a seamless, understanding of the problem statement before the solution. Fantastic. I think on that note, I think we can wrap up the session. So can I have a huge round of applause for our panelists, Rajiv and Sanjeev?